And now for tonight's program. We're delighted to have with us Bill Deen, recounting his Colorado steam adventure in August and September of last year. In all, Bill saw 11 operating steam locomotives in 10 days, and we'll let him tell more about that as he gets started on his program. Bill's a retired engineering professor who for many years has photographed steam in the United States, Canada, and overseas. He's also a model railroader focusing on steam-era Pacific Northwest logging and HO scale. He's an officer and director of the Friends of Bedford Depot Park in Bedford, Mass, and is completing a book about the Boston and Maine's Lexington branch, which will be published later this year.
All right, how is the audio?
Sounds good, Bill.
Okay. Well, I'm going to tell you about a trip I took last summer after almost 2 years of no rail fanning. In July, the COVID numbers were starting to look better. Wasn't that nice back then? And I started looking around for trips that I could take. And what caught my attention first was a charter that Trains Magazine was running out of Durango with the fairly recently restored K37 493 and then an SP 18 10-wheeler from California. So I signed up for that, and then I realized that I could catch the last couple of days, if I went a little bit early, of the Victorian Steam Roundup on the Cumbres and Toltec, which was part of their 50th anniversary celebration that they delayed for a year. And then finally, I realized that if I stayed an extra 2 days, I could get some glimpses of the big boy returning to Cheyenne from its trip to New Orleans. So that's how the trip came together, and I'll take you through it in chronologically. In between the Cumbres and Toltec and the Durango and Silverton charters, there was some time to look at the regular operations of both and to poke around Chama and Durango. We'll do a little bit of that too. So early Friday morning, just after sunrise, I found myself in Antonito, and the big thing that day on the Cumbres and Toltec was a pair of double headers that were going to run the full length of the railroad. One was a double header of the two wood-burning engines visiting from Nevada, the Eureka and the Glenbrook. The Eureka, many of you may have seen at one point. It's been operating as a guest at various places around the West since 1991, built in 1875. The Glenbrook is the property of the Nevada State Railroad Museum and was restored only in 2015. And just last year did it receive the air brake equipment that would allow it to pull trains on the Cumbres and Toltec. So that was needed for this event. Like the Eureka, it was built in 1875, and the construction numbers are close enough that the two might have actually been on the Baldwin erecting floor at the same time, although they went to different railroads. A couple tracks over was the 489, which was going to power the regular Cumbres and Toltec turn from Antonito to Osier. 49 has been recently converted to oil. And then beyond that, you can see the other double header of vintage engines with the passenger train. Pulling those was the Denver Rio Grande 168, which was recently restored a year or two ago by the Cumbres and Toltec. And the 425, which some of you may know as the 315, that was its 1920s and later number, but it's been backdated to about 1915 for the purpose of this event. Antonito does have a functional water tower. Look at the passenger train. It was a 4-car consist of genuine 1870s and 80s equipment. first in line was an RPO, then there were a couple of 1870s and 80s coaches, and then bringing up the back was an 1880s sleeper, which was restored just that, I think, last year by the Friends of the Cumbres and Toltec. So quite a handsome train. Well, eventually it was showtime. This is the passenger doubleheader leaving Antonito. And heading out of town. As things turned out, this is the last I would see of the 168 and the 425 operating because of a combination of mechanical problems and schedules that got blown to pieces near the end of the event. But it was nice to see them for a little bit. That afternoon, I drove to Chama. There wasn't much happening, but if you know Chama, you know there's a lot of enjoyable stuff just to walk around and look at and appreciate the authentic original railroad terminal atmosphere. That was it for the day. The double headers didn't arrive until after dark, and I didn't return until early the next morning, which found the two Nevada wood burners occupying stalls in the remaining two stalls of the very little used anymore original Chama roundhouse. As the time went on in the morning, of course, the crowd built up more and more. The 425 was there in Chama first thing in the morning. It had come down with the passenger train after dark. For some reason, the 168 had been left up in Cumbres in the snow shed, and there was a distant whistle, and it rolled in early that morning into Chama to join the other three of the so-called Victorian engines. The two wood burners were being prepared to run a mixed train to Cumbres Pass and back. Coupling them was a big production. They, because of the pilots and the lack of knuckle couplers on the front of either one, they used a special link and pin arrangement for which I gathered they had to get special FRA permission. Also, you might notice the Glenbrook has an air hose on the pilot. The Eureka does not, which required that the Eureka always lead. Time to wood up. The logistics of operating two wood burners on a 64-mile, I think it's 64 miles railroad, were horrendous, especially in a one-time event like this. So here's the front end loader bringing that morning's wood supply. To operate between Antonito and Chama required at various times that the railroad leave wood supplies every few miles along the track. And here's on the right is a gon filled with wood that's going to be taken by the regular train up to Lobato, just 4 miles away from Chama, so that the two wood burners can stop there and wood up. So imagine how many times they had to do it between Chama and Antonito Chama a couple days before. The little engines were not going to leave until later in the morning, so I decided to chase the regular 10 o'clock train out of Chama that was going to go to Osier and meet the train there from Antonito and then come back. 487 was in charge. I think there's nothing more fierce than the running gear of a K37 or a K36 like this one. So the chase is on. Here the train is just exiting the Narrows. I'm sure some of you are familiar with the area. And you see at the back of the regular passenger train, there are two boxcars and that wood gonda that I referred to. They're going to leave the gondola on the siding at Lobato so that the Nevada engines can wood up when they get there later in the morning. And then the boxcars are going to go all the way to Cumbres Pass so that they can provide extra braking when the little engines come downhill from Cumbres. Now, it turned out the little engines didn't make it that far, so the hauling of boxcars up didn't end up accomplishing anything. The number of people chasing the regular train was moderate. It was fairly easy to get to decent spots along the highway, which we're on the 4% here between, of course, between Chama and Cumbres. A little bit below Cresco. If you look at the end of the train, the gonda has already been dropped off farther back at Lobato, and the two boxcars are still there. And the rest is the regular consist of the daily train out of Chama. The two trains meet at Osier. The engines return to their home terminals, and I believe the consists continue on to the opposite terminal. Approaching the grade crossing at Coxo, a little bit farther up. And then about 20 minutes later from the same spot, you can turn around and look at the train rounding Windy Point, which is about half a mile down from Cumbres Pass. If you know the Children's Polar Express book, there's one page on that I swear must have been inspired by this view of Windy Point. Well, I left the regular train then and headed back down toward Chama to see if I could pick up the two wood burners with their mixed train. I caught them at Lobato, where they were in the middle of a very lengthy wooding up stop. So here they are with full wood supplies again, as I said, just 4 miles out of Chama, and they're about to head across the Lobato trestle. Lower right, you can see what the motorcade was like. It was a bit of a challenge to get ahead of the train and safely get to good spots. Not that the train was moving fast, but that there were just so many people on the road, and as you can guess, some of them were being pretty reckless. Top right again, it's just below Cresco. A couple more shots. This is the last I saw of them, a little bit above here at Cresco. They stopped, I guess, for water, maybe for wood again, and couldn't get going. They proved to be the little engines that couldn't that day. The Eureka was having trouble steaming. The Glenbrook tried to get to power the 3-car train and was unable to do so. And finally, they sent the 425 up from Chama, and it brought this little mixed train back to Chama after dark. So that was all I saw of the little engines, but it was nice while it lasted. I came back down to Chama and just poked around. The 168 was sitting there near the engine house, got a good look at it, although I wouldn't see it run again. When it did run, it ran after dark, and then it had a breakdown actually at Cumbres Pass that required an emergency repair the next day. So the day after that was my last day. We've gone Friday, Saturday. This is now Sunday. I'm going to put the camera away more or less and just ride the regular train to Osier. Here on the far left is the 425 with the vintage passenger consist, and it's ready for, this is the last day of the Victorian Roundup event. It and the 168 are to pull the passenger cars on a night run all the way to Antonito, the first narrow gauge sleeper service in 70, 80 years. But I would not see that. It was all after dark. I was amused by the message on the front cab door of the 425. I'll read it for you. It says, engine equipped with flange oilers. Use it. Alamosa, March 1936. Well, the Cumbres and Toltec remains, aside from the 49, a coal-burning railroad with all the work that requires. The coaling tower has been partly restored. The hoist motor works. The buckets go up and down, but I guess the condition of the buckets and maybe other parts is such that it's not yet functional. Maybe it will be someday. And so there's another use for the front end loader and doing their regular coal refueling. Next day was a drive to Durango, and the day after that, here we are in the morning at the Durango depot. Durango and Silverton last summer was, or at least in August, I think most of the summer was running just 3 trains. They had an 8 a.m. diesel train going all the way to Silverton, a 9 a.m. steam to Silverton, and then a 9:30 a.m. going just halfway to Cascade. One of the diesels that you see here is an ex-White Pass in Yukon, Alco Montreal CC road switcher. And we'll see a little bit, more of that. On the first day I was in Durango, the regular train was being handled by the 493, recently restored K37, one of only, I think it's only 2 that are operable. There's one at the Colorado Railroad Museum, and it was restored as an oil burner a couple of years ago, and it's been the workhorse for the Durango and Silverton. So I had a free day, so I decided to ride the train to Cascade. Here we are, again, many of you have taken this ride, I think, and we're at the Horseshoe Curve on the High Line, and I think anyone who shows no interest in taking a picture at that point is required to leave the train and walk back to Durango. A close up of the 473. You can see it's been converted to oil as well. And a shot on the crossing the High Bridge, and then on the tail track of the Y at Cascade before the return back to Durango. Had time also to do the formal yard tour and poke around a little bit. Here you see 2 more White Pass diesels that the Durango and Silverton have acquired. They have a total of 4. Here, one is totally unrepainted, and another one that looks like they've done some experiments with the orange and maroon. Looks like kind of a Milwaukee Road inspired colors. And I honestly don't know what that thing is on the right. The Durango and Silverton is on its way to being 100% oil fired. I've mentioned the 473 and the 493, those and the 480 powered all of their steam trains from April on last year. The 42, when I was there in August, was in the process of being converted. You can see the oil bunker and its tender here. It was also being refluid, by the way. I was told that the 476 and 481 are likely to be next, but they're being held in coal just for the Polar Express trains in December. And for all I know, their conversions are underway now. 478 has got, I guess, quite a bit wrong with it. It's just been a museum display, and the 486 was also out of service, but I think could probably be put back into service pretty readily. But that, anyway, that's the fuel status of on the Durango and Silverton. Well, on the first day of the train's charter, it was an early morning walk from Rockwood downhill to the cliffs below the station there and above the lake. And here was a way too early shot of the 493 on our mixed train. First day of the charter, we had only the 493. Here's a run by giving another view of the High Line horseshoe curve from the opposite direction. High bridge from the river level. Many run-bys each day on this trip. I think people got their money's worth. After several run-bys, we had to get in the hole so that the regular 8 a.m. diesel Silverton train could pass us. And you notice that the Alco is trying its best to equal the smoke of the 493. But here there's no contest, a little turn of the firing valve and the 493 wins. Here we're in the hole again for the Silverton steam train, and it was being double-headed that day with the SP 18 from California, so that the 18 could be in Silverton to join our charter on the next day. Of course, the 493 was on our charter, so the other of the larger oil burners, the 480 was the road engine that day. The Durango and Silverton personnel were very congenial and cooperative. This young woman up there on the roadbed on the left is their special events coordinator. On the right, to show how cooperative they were, you see the conductor with a chainsaw cutting down a little pine that the photographers had objected to on one of the photo stops. You see some of the guys actually pulling up shrubbery and so forth in the back. And so here's the run by at that spot with a newly cleared foreground. On the left, you have the 493 doing its best to impersonate a volcanic eruption. And then last shot of the day that's a bridge that's just on the south end of Silverton. Well, the next day at Silverton, it was bright and sunny. The charter group is out. Everybody's looking down the track as the crews prepare the two trains for the second of the two-day photo charter. That day, the SP 18 had a short freight, and the 493 a 4-car passenger consist. While we were waiting, they did some run-bys by the Durango depot, and I must say of the 11 engines that I saw during the 10 days, by far the loudest was the SP 18. It put the big boy and all the others actually to shame, the stack sound, perhaps because it was working much nearer its capacity than any of the others. This car, which I think is a 1920s vintage Model A, someone may know better than me, is the property of one of the SP crew, and he brought it with him from California. It's a car that had been in his family for ages, and he restored it and made a nice flat car load. So here we are on the, again, next to the, now the opposite side of the bridge, just south of Silverton to catch the morning sun. You can see the 4-car passenger consist. And here we are with the meet, of course, for the first Silverton train. The ex-White Pass 107 again with it. You can see I kind of took a liking to the SP-18. And of course, in that on that route, you can point your camera in any direction and you'll get something scenic. Of course, the SP-18 had always been an oil burner, and many of you may be aware that it was invited a couple of years ago to Durango to help with the training of their crews as they got ready to begin the conversion and operation of their engines. This is a shot while the engine is blowing down the boiler, and it's from one of the abandoned bridges on the way down to Durango from Silverton. On the left, you see the actually part of the photo line setting up for a shot at a intact or mostly intact water tank. And on the right, you see the one of the photos that resulted. There are authentic and not so authentic aspects of this view. And possibly authentic thing is that since the SP-18 had come all the way from California, it probably was really due for a water stop. What was less authentic is that the tank actually is non-functional, and the fireman up there on the spout is just doing a good acting job. But what the heck, we're there. Let's do some more run-bys. And now late in the day, we're back on the High Line. The 2 trains have been combined with the 18 in the lead, and there was a series of run-bys here, and then the 18 was sent down to Durango, and the 493 continued on its own, and that ended the train's photo charter, which was on a Friday. Saturday, with a friend who had joined me, I spent the 8 or so hours driving from Durango to Sharon Springs, Kansas. And this is the route that the big boy had taken in going from Cheyenne to New Orleans and back, different routes each way. And if you look near the top left, you see Sharon Springs on the western edge of Kansas. And the day that we chased it, it was the 3rd to the last day of their month-long trip to New Orleans. We chased from Sharon Springs to the outskirts of Denver, where the roads and the traffic just got too difficult. But so I'll just show you a few glimpses of the big boy to go up in scale and gauge and locomotive size. Sharon Springs, the morning of this is the Labor Day Sunday. Sharon Springs is a little farm town with a motel and a cafe on the highway, and actually quite a nice B&B that I stayed at in an old brick Methodist church in town, former Methodist church. This again is the mandatory big boy photo. Union Pacific asked you to leave the property unless you notice that they still have big boy painted on the smoke box. Of course, the engine was immaculate. We're just a little bit west of Sharon Springs now, and this is the countryside. It was cattle grazing and sorghum fields mostly. Notice the amount of smoke, just a little wisp coming out of the 4014 stack. This is a seriously overpowered train. 12 cars behind the 4,400 horsepower GE 4015 and the two canteens in the 4014. If there was just one disappointing thing, aside from the traffic on the highway, which I'll show you in a moment, is that the 4014, I guess in diesel terms, was almost at idle the whole trip. Never worked hard, and all that would have been nice to have been obviously back in Wyoming in the 50s and to see the kind of power those engines had, but it was just coasting along. Here's a meet with a grain train. The route they're following is the old Kansas Pacific from Kansas City to Denver. Single track, not to be confused with the more northern main line through North Platte at all. Here's a shot of the motorcade on US 40. You can see what we weren't the last car by any means, but you can see how it goes out of sight in the distance. If you look really carefully in the lower left of that photo, you can see in the distance the back of the train actually. Train was going maybe, track speed there, I'm guessing, is maybe 40 miles per hour, and it wasn't, of course, it wasn't exceeding that. So it was kind of a leisurely jog for the 4014's crew and its helper that day. Where some of the grain came from, the towns that went through west of Sharon Springs are places like Cheyenne Wells, Colorado, Kit Carson, Colorado, and Hugo, Colorado. I've kind of got them mixed up in my mind now, but you can see kind of the nature of the single track old KP here, fair amount of curvature as well. So, like I said, not to be confused with North Platte. To the UP's credit, they ran on schedule pretty much. At each town, there was at least a short stop, maybe 20 minutes, half an hour. A lot of people turned out at each stop. It was a big event in each of these towns. Here's it getting underway from one of the little towns. The fireman's attention looking forward is increased partly by the fact that a minute ago there was some clown standing on the track up ahead, just beyond a little bridge, and but they may have blown the whistle. That might have helped get them off the track. Although there was very little stack talk because the engine wasn't working, it has a magnificent, deep 3-chime, whistle that was very fitting. Here's that bridge where the person was standing in the rear of the, 12-car train. And so for the last of my Colorado slides, here's Big Boy and Little Boy. And I'll end, if there are any B&M fans still awake, I would like to bring your attention a book that will be coming out later this year. It's about the long and surprisingly colorful history of the Lexington branch, northwest of Boston. The Lexington branch started out as a country short line near the dawn of Boston railroading, was acquired by the Boston and Lowell and used as a weapon to help it invade the Fitchburg Railroad's territory. The Boston and Lowell built it up into a partly double-tracked railroad with 60, that's 60 trains per day. The B&M continued that for a bit. It fought off a parallel streetcar line in the early 1900s, and then, of course, eventually declined as automobiles took over. The book itself is a little over 200 pages. It'll be a cloth hardbound with quality heavy gloss paper, lots of illustrations. It'll be published by Friends of Bedford Depot Park, and we're hoping for July 2022. And it's going to be relatively inexpensive for two reasons. One is that the author doesn't get a dime from it, and the other is that the publisher is just hoping to break even. So anyway, thank you for your attention and tuning in. And if there are questions afterwards, I'll hang around as long as anybody likes.
Thank you very much, Bill. That was some fascinating photos and a lot of different action there. So, all right, well, I guess there are, nobody's really got a specific question. So with that, again, Bill, thank you very much for a fabulous program. Must have been a very exciting 10 days for you. And with that, we will end the Facebook program and the recording. And anybody who'd like now to just pop in and chat with us about anything at all, feel free to raise your hand and do so. With that, thank you all, and we'll see you next month.